Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and my guest today is Jane. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you here. You have a broad impact on the cube design gamut right now, and one of your projects that has recently taken the cube world by storm, if you'll allow that kind of reach. I've just been so fascinated by it, and I'm so excited to get to talk about that and many other things. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I've listened to a few of these with some very wonderful folk and glad to be considered one of them myself for once.
For once, oh my goodness, no,
That's my tired brain speaking. I've been up since 3 a.m. Chaperoning a high school trip. So anything I say should be taken with a grain of salt, both because that's just generally a good rule of thumb, but also because it might be airplane Jane speaking.
This is also reasonably like in recent days I've been somewhat accused of having the tendencies of the interviewer Nardwar, and he's known for accosting people at really inconvenient times. So maybe this is following that vein as well. It's like, hey, you're ready for sleep? Here we go.
I feel like I jumped on an inconvenient time. It's more like I've ambushed Nardwar right out of the B gate of the Spokane airport, and he's like, "Oh, we're doing this now. Cool. Okay." Let me whip out all of this personal detail that I snooped in the last 24 hours.
Well, let's see. One of the things I wanted to ask as we get in is that you are a creative individual. You have a number of different things that you pursue. Why is Cube one of those, Jane?
Cube is a strange beast in terms of the ways that I like to pursue creative expression, in that it didn't feel like a creative endeavor when I first got into it. It just felt like a thing that made sense to do socially. And that's not how I've gotten into a lot of my other, creative pursuits in the, art world or music world or writing world. But I've told this story a few times in a few different places, but the shortened version is when I went off to college, I just encountered a setting which was college kids realizing that no, college is not too cool for magic, and yes, they should still play magic, but also no, they don't have a way to play magic because everyone has, a random half shoebox of, out of date standard decks, picked apart EDH stuff. So I just started putting boxes of cards together for people to play with, and found out that that was called Cube, and then was like, oh, people actually care about this and do it well. Uh-oh. that means that I've got some work to do.
But yeah, like this is a real thing that people can do and enjoy, it turns out.
Exactly. There's a shadow cabal of people online. I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know where they meet. I don't know what they look like, what they're talking about. But apparently, I should run balance. Okay. That one's cheap because I know I can't run it in Commander. Cool. Maybe I'll get a copy of that and stick it into this thing that also has Tybalt the Fiend blooded in it because he was a planeswalker I owned. And I was like, that's cool.
If Tybalt the Fiendblooded has a home, it is almost certainly in a cube somewhere.
Yeah, this is a tangent, but of course that's kind of what I do when I talk into a mic. Is I'm so glad that I've seen a few other curators just stick cards like Tybalt into cubes in the last few years, because A, it means that nature is healing, and B, it means someone else is doing it so I don't have to. Because I really love that card, but I've still never made an environment again where I was like, I actually feel like I should stick Tybalt into it. Ball Pit is, if I were to put Tybalt into any Magic project I have right now, it would be Ball Pit, just because of the vibes of that cube. But I don't want any Planeswalkers in that cube at all. So that's automatically a hard cutoff.
I do want to say I love that your take was if somebody puts a card like that in a cube, it's freedom to not do it rather than freedom to do it.
I have so many cards like that where I'm like, this is a great card. I feel bad for it because it's lovely. I could totally make a thing to put this in, but I only have so much bandwidth. I only have so much brain on a given day. I don't know if I'll ever make a environment in which I feel like it truly belongs, and then I'll see someone else do something really cornball, and I'm like, ooh, okay, that's out there. Someone's gonna be able to draft a cube, or at least scroll through a digital list and then post on Reddit about this one card, and I think that's great.
Well, yeah, you've referenced the cube that I that I wanted to explore together today. This is the ball pit. Like this is such an amazing project for a number of reasons. Would you mind giving us the elevator pitch for this one?
Yeah, the elevator pitch for Ball Pit is it's a desert cube where you have to draft all your lands, but it's also a cube where there's no deck building phase. So once you finish the draft, your pool of cards is your deck. Those are the draft changes. The flagship card of this cube is Chromatic Sphere, which is the 1 mana artifact that you can pay 1 mana, tap, and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool and draw a card. It's an activated ability, but it counts as a mana source. So, you can't, if you name Chromatic Sphere, for example, with something like Pithing Needle, you can still activate it. And every single card in this cube can be cast face down as a copy of Chromatic Sphere. It's kind of like Morph. It's kind of like a modal double-faced card. So there are technically no copies of Chromatic Sphere in this cube. Every card is some other card in Magic. A lot of them are lands. A lot of them are wacky, 2010s era Scars of Mirrodin artifacts or artificers that I fell in love with and just really have a coherent vibe from back when Magic made sets that felt like Magic sets. I say yelling at the clouds. But it's a wacky cube because on the one hand, it is janky as all get out. You're like, why are there? Wait, okay, almost all of these lands tap for colorless mana, but there's a lot of colored. How am I? Oh, okay, almost all of my colored mana has to be gotten from a Chromatic Sphere, which I only get if I choose one of the cards that's already in my hand and choose to play it face down as a Chromatic Sphere instead of as what it is. That's kind of clunky. There's some weird cards in here that I haven't played with before. That's a trip. On the other hand, it's weirdly one of the smoother things I've played because a lot of the speed bumps of Magic haven't necessarily been entirely removed, but they've at least been brushed down a little bit. So, deck building, it feels like everything matters because everything you draft ends up in your deck. But on the flip side, you almost never truly feel like you're dead in the water and have dead cards because every single card can be essentially cycled for 1 mana because you can cast it for 1 mana and then sink in a mana that you then get 1 color back and draw a card. So it's a really wacky thing that came to me over a lot of time because it, like creative projects tend to do, it evolved in its goals and therefore in its execution. But it's a funny thing that exists now. I own a copy on paper. It is not backsleeved with 480 copies of Chromatic Sphere yet.
Not yet. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I won't actually just say my address on this podcast, but people have already DM'd me and have sent me a fair number of them. I don't know exactly what percent of the way I am through there because calculating the percentage of completion I am at for a project is the antithesis of the vibe of the ball pit. It's something that you just jump into and at some point you go, oh, okay, there's a result. Cool. Either I now jump back in it again or I go like sanitize my entire body because good God, that was an experience.
I mean, maybe both, but
probably both. Yeah, we'll say both. Insert that clip from the Rodel Dorado of both is good.
Both is good.
wait, before we break down some of those specifics, because there's so much meat on the bone here. I wanted to check, where does the inspiration for something like this come from? Is there like a systematic process to build this? Was it a sudden like flash of insight? Was this a fever dream?
It was very carefully planned out by me just wandering through the disease passages of my brain over the course of like a year and a half. It started out with the card Energy Chamber, which, if you have not seen Energy Chamber before, it is a 2 mana artifact that just says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose one. Either put a 1/1 counter on target artifact creature, or put a charge counter on target non-creature artifact.
This is one of my absolute favorite cards
Yeah,
in my counters cube. I love Energy
Oh,
Chamber.
of course, yeah. It's gorgeous. Kev Walker art, real amazing painting there. It's I think it's dark steel, so 2005-ish Magic just personified, something that does absolutely nothing on its own.
Yeah.
other than technically it can put charge counters on itself. So it does something,
But like, yeah,
but not
like
something useful on its own.
some of my favorite engines that do nothing until you figure out the key.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a few things about this card that really stuck out to me. One is that I've always loved artifacts. It's always been a card that has existed in my brain since I started playing Magic after it came out. It's also a card that's very not the way that I play Magic, meaning I am often the very, for lack of a better word, the clean drafter at the table who says, I've either determined from the cards I'm getting past that a low to the ground aggressive deck is the best way to go, or that I want to be a controlling, shut down every threat that I know I can't answer, letting the little things get through until I do something big that takes over the game for me. I almost never end up drafting decks that just generate value because there's usually something else that I think does better than the thing that generates value. But I as a cube designer, I love a lot of elements of Magic that I don't necessarily play with very often, and Energy Chamber is the perfect example of that. So Ball Pit actually didn't start out as a Chromatic Sphere cube at all. In my mind, the original idea of Ball Pit was a cube where everyone just starts the game with a energy chamber on the battlefield.
Oh, interesting.
And you can actually play Ball Pit with a variation of that. There are exactly 8 copies of Energy Chamber in the cube right now. I might bump that number up later, which I could get to some other time. But as much as I love talking about Ball Pit, I would rather talk about the creative process of it, which was just going through, what do I actually want out of this? So my first thought was, okay, everyone starts with one on the battlefield. Then the entire cube has to circle around that. So there would be a lot of very cheap creatures that aren't necessarily good on their own, but that you can play early and start building up. So suddenly all of those Memnites are really fun because you can play them on turn 1 and shenanigans ensue. Or there are so many bad, bad artifacts that have charge counters on them that are just almost unplayable, even in some of the formats that they were built for.
Yep.
And they just straight up don't work unless you have something that gets them going in a way that regular Magic doesn't. So those were kind of the two things that I got started on. But I quickly, this is all just in my head. I work in my head until I have a cube pretty, the ideas of it pretty well bounded off before I actually start putting anything together. So that was probably like a year and a half ago, maybe. And then I thought, okay, well, I immediately have an issue, which is what do I do about interaction with these energy chambers? They're on the battlefield. Should they be targetable? Should you be able to blow them up? Should they just be like an emblem? Should there be more copies of them that you can draft so you could end up with 2 of them? Because that's really fun.
Do they count as artifacts for the purposes of
Yeah,
cards that
like
care about that?
what am I going to do? Because, you know, if you have out that artifact that gets bigger with other artifacts, that might be too good. And I pretty quickly decided I think I actually just want a cube that has a decent number of these in it. Not that I actually want a cube that starts with 1 out. And that was one cube design that was going in my brain that started a while ago and then kind of stalled. Not in a bad way. I actually kind of like it when a cube project stalls in my mind because it gives me time to just sit with whatever had got me interested in it in the first place. You know, just turning that card over in my head.
You know, there's this one of my favorite books is called Imagine by Jonah Lehrer. It's a kind of about how the brain works and connecting different ways to make creativity happen. And that's one of the things he suggests is just having that idle time where you can work on an idea in the background or just think on things and not be actively doing it as a project. So that makes a whole lot of sense as you describe it that way.
Big fan of just sitting with something in your head. It's hard in this day and age to make time for that. This was a lot of that process for me happens when I'm falling asleep.
Yeah, yeah.
It's doubly helpful because A, it's a creative, fun, engaging thing to do, and B, especially if you're someone that has a at times loud brain, at times not entirely healthily loud brain, it's additionally medicative of helping you keep other thoughts at bay. And that's just a symbiotic thing of it. It's helpful and it's helpful. So I often have some project just like turning around a little bit in the background. And the thing that got me to finally say, okay, I should start making a cube that has some of these goals was that thought kind of bumped up in the night against another thought, which was a number of years ago. The only time frame I can give for this was it was before Andy, at least publicly, broadcasted the 100 Ornithopters cube. A number of years ago, I had in my head, I would love to have a cube where the only creatures in it are Mer enforcers. And Mer enforcer is a so clearly one of these thoughts is a little bit more elegant, a little bit more marketable. Mer enforcer is a 7 mana big boy. He's just a 7 mana 4/4 artifact creature that happens to have affinity for artifacts. So just a weird card, you know. I don't play a lot of formats of Magic, so someone who knows Magic can reply to your podcast comments and say that this was, the scourge of standard or something like that, and I just wouldn't know. But I was like, I would love a cube that's all about bad artifacts that you need to cast in order to be able to get out the creatures that you then interact with those bad artifacts, and that's how you win the game. And the only creatures you can use are Mer Enforcers. And eventually Andy came out with 100 Ornithopters, which was very similar in some ways, but spiritually kind of the opposite of 100 Ornithopters turned into, here's a useless card, let's absolutely break it in half. Let's come up with the fastest things you can do, the craziest things you can do. And I just wanted to force people to kind of get down in the mud and find a way to slug it out with Mer Enforcers. And especially once, again, I love it when someone else comes out with a project that makes me say, the people do not need this immediately. The people already have something to scratch that itch. And 100 Ornithopters 100% did that. So then eventually, that not scrapped, that shelved idea in the back of my head bumped up against the energy chamber cube. And I was like, what if I have a cube that's mostly just energy chambers and Mir enforcers? And I can't describe the full thought process, but those gears just started to grind. I kept finding things that just didn't make sense. But the whole point of the energy chambers is I want fast creatures you get out early. And also, what do I do about colors in this cube? And at some point, the idea hit me to just have every card be castable as Chromatic Sphere, and that changed the whole thing. Then I was like, wait, okay, then I can break Singleton really easily on a lot of things. I could make it a desert cube. I've always wanted to have a cube where there was no deck building phase, partially because I just play Magic with a lot of very new players, and that is, on the one hand, a stressful part of the draft for them, because they feel like they're pressured to either cut cards they think are cool based on vibes, but maybe not strong enough. And it can especially be a humiliating experience for a lot of newer drafters, because some Magic players love when they finish a draft and an experienced Magic player tells them, you should 100% have been running this card in your sideboard the entire
Mhm,
time,
mhm.
because it's a learning experience. But most Magic players that I play Magic with hate having anything like that happen, or they just feel embarrassed if they notice it later without someone having told them. They're like, "Ah, I don't know why I did that. That was dumb." And it's kind of refreshing for some of them to be able to say, "Okay, I draft my cards. I already did the decision making. I don't know why I would do a second round of decision making." Some people love that. I love that. But some people want the chance to draft something like this that you just finish step one and just move right into step two of playing with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely one of those things that feels like a pipe dream when you think about it from a design perspective. How do you design a drafting game in a broader game like Magic that is resource driven and then not have a deck building component to it? And so this is a really fascinating way to have solved, maybe a bold word here, but like to have set up in a way that you don't have to worry about it.
I can't claim that I'm the first person to come up with something like this. I've seen, I have a battle box where you have lands in essentially in the command zone in exile that you can just play one per turn. I've considered making a cube like that where you can always hit a land drop. That's one way to do it. I've seen other people where they didn't think about it as MDFC because it wasn't with a casting cost, and that thought didn't really pop up, but just that you could cast any card, play any card face down as a rainbow land. And
Sure.
then it's essentially a desert cube, but also there's no lands in it, so it's something else. And those are all really fun ideas that my peculiar personal idea of Magic felt slightly off about. Those of They were just one step further in, okay, this feels like I'm playing a game with Magic cards. more than it feels like I'm playing the sort of Magic that feels most Magic-y to me. And I'm sure there are people who look at Ball Pit and say the same thing, where to them it seems different because I've fundamentally changed one of the rules of Magic, but maybe it's just because it's my weird ugly baby. I love it, and it feels right up my alley in rules Magic combination.
Well, yeah, and I think there's something that I'm so tickled by of seeing just the flow of the ball pit, less about chromatic sphere and in many ways, so much more about the cards that you mentioned. There's over a dozen mirror enforcers in the current list.
I don't know
There's
how many I settled at. It's probably 16. While spitballing it, the number has been anywhere from 8 to 32. I kind of stuck with those. Actually, that's false. I definitely had 29 of them at one point and was just like, that's gross. and
this is they didn't stop to think whether or not they should just
correct. It's like the scientist who walks out of the lab after an experiment and sees themselves in the mirror, and they're just like, "Oh my god, is this what's been going on the whole time?"
One of the things you noted or that's all over your overview, which I love, is the spheres will guide you.
Ah,
Kind of a
yes.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that and why that matters here.
Okay. The spheres will guide you is, let's talk about creativity because it's important here. When I write, it's very stream of consciousness. I'll edit what I write if that's necessary, and I'll do like a skim for copy editing, make sure most things are spelled right. But a lot of the weird stuff I write isn't because I workshopped it. It's not because I was like, this is the next tagline for Target. It's not corporate. It's the spheres will guide you was just what kept popping into my head when I was working on the overview of the ball pit because there's a lot of imagery in many cultures about the spheres, whether they're celestial or otherwise terrestrial, etc. And music of the spheres and spheres just being kind of this mystical, perfect seeming shape that has either some form of inherent power or value or knowledge. And the ball pit just kind of censoring myself, poops all over that. It just says, no, the spheres are this funny thing, and they may be necessary for life in this cube. You are almost required to cast cards as Chromatic Sphere.
Yeah, because your fixing isn't so strong to allow for just a
No,
perfect rainbow of any kind.
there is fixing, but it's few and far between and usually a little bit painful. And some drafters prioritize those fixing lands because they say this has a colored mana pip on it. That's powerful. The people that I think truly get the spirit of the ball pit don't look at the colors of the lands they're drafting because they know that the spheres will guide them. And that's the that's the phrase that kept popping into my head because essentially it's that you will have a deck that doesn't feel like you know where it's going to go and you just have to roll with that because you're going to have cards that you cast face down that you then later on wish that you hadn't. And your deck is pretty thick and you weren't able to cut cards from it. So you're going to hit some cards that you might not want to hit. And at the end of the day, that's just how the cube works.
And there are going to be times that you're going to be able to cast those cards even if you didn't plan to, just because of how the cube is designed.
Exactly. So the spheres guiding you is a shorthand for saying just relax. It's a fun cube. Somewhere in there, I think it's at the end, I have a little bit of a jab at people who get competitive while playing cubes like this, in that I love competitive Magic players. I love playing competitively against competitive Magic players. If someone's getting salty playing the ball pit, and it's not just because they have decided that something is actually poorly designed and wants to have strong words with me, I just say, okay, cool, you might want to take a break. This cube is not meant to be the top 8 cube at CubeCon. It's not something that I think people can really try to squeeze the absolute most competitive angle out of possible because I've put in a lot of speed bumps to that in the slightly larger deck size, the inability to cut cards. But I personally don't think that that means it's a cube that you can't express skill in. I had one of the more skill testing Magic games I've had in at least the last year with a very good player in my play group where she was on a deck that was almost entirely manland focused. and I was on kind of a control deck that couldn't deal very much with man lands. So we were just really, it was like two people who are like trying to improv on two different instruments, but they know that only one person can win. So it was it was very much an interesting experience, and it was so much fun. So anyway, point is, the spheres will guide you. You can probably get what you want to out of this cube if you actually try.
True jazz, where you improvise to win.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of spoke to it a little bit there, but is the ball pit meant to feel like a gimmick cube, or is it supposed to feel a little more serious than that?
Oh, that's a great question that I don't necessarily have a great answer to, at least not immediately. The ball pit, I will say, is a gimmick cube. The ball pit, I also think, is not a cube that you're supposed to think about what it is. You're just supposed to have fun playing with it, which might by nature make it a gimmick cube. But one of the goals of it, which so far with the limited playtesting I've gotten from it has been met, is that you shouldn't be thinking about the gimmick after maybe your first game. You know, the first game that you play in this cube, you kind of have to figure out what you're doing. You're like, okay, I'm not used to this new angle of how I cast these cards. Game one will probably feel pretty gimmicky. After that, you know, you start kind of getting a swing of it, and it starts to feel less gimmicky. And, you know, my goal with this cube is for people to have fun. That's probably evident. The way that I approached that is pretty obtuse in terms of how most people approach cubes. And I'm perfectly happy with anybody calling this cube gimmicky or clown shoes, sorry, Arlo, or any number of other things. They could call it things that I'm not supposed to say on this podcast. I really don't care. The people that play it laugh a lot. And at the end of the day, that's probably what I'm going for.
I think that's a good goal to have. Speaking of goals, one of the things I really appreciated was post one of the events where you got to host this cube. You had a couple of questions that you set out to answer going in, and I don't know that I've seen many reports that start with that of like, here are the things I was actually trying to answer with a playtest or like with just playing this environment. Can you talk a little bit about that setup and that experience?
So this was the what I call it, first-hand account of the ball pit incident.
That's
The
right. Yes.
um, oh gosh, yeah, talk about stream of consciousness writing that I do. Um, Questions going in: are drafters and players excited about their cards and their decks? Do the spheres feel clunky when you use them? Does the cube still feel like magic? What's working and what isn't working? Who had fun and how? Who didn't have fun and why? Those were the spitballed questions that I had. I didn't write it down on a pad of paper and Nardwar ambush people, but
No, that would
but
have been great.
maybe I will next time. Yeah. Only one of those really was specific to this cube, which is how clunky the spheres felt when people were using them. The rest of that is really just how I approach organized magic as a whole when I'm somebody who has control over the cards in that environment. And, you know, people have talked a lot in smoother ways on other podcasts about going into this sort of thing with design goals and going in with design questions. I think Lucky Paper Radio released one on the day that I dropped this article, which was pretty funny. But all of those questions to me come around to just what is the player experience. Two of the questions are about excitement. Are people excited about their cards in their decks? And then are they having fun with their cards in their decks? And two of the questions were just, does this work? You know, do the chromatic spheres actually function the way that I want them to? I know rules wise they do, but that's very different than how it functions on paper. And again, does the cube feel like magic? Because that was the thing that for me, I really wanted it to feel like. The only question that's just kind of the straight up boring one is just what's working and what isn't. You know, that's the question that I ask myself mostly in terms of if someone tells me that's an answer to the question. I don't go around asking people, what do you think is too strong? What do you think is too weak? Because the people who have those thoughts tend to self select and giving me the answers for them. As you can tell if you read this article, the thing I was most interested in is just the wacky vibes going on and what people were trying to do. And it was a good first draft in that it was weird. There were a lot of surprises, and it was fun. And I was like, okay, this is worth doing again.
Yeah, certainly a recommended read. It is a fun journey from top to
Thank
bottom.
you.
Um, I was wondering, with this being an inaugural draft, is this the sort of thing that you would even set up these questions that you may think of as boring? Like, is this the sort of thing you set up for other projects, or is this kind of unique to something like this?
So this is the only time I have had a cube have an inaugural draft the way that this cube did. Tabletop Cube evolved over, a decade of starting with just boxes of weird cards with college kids at Whitman in Walla Walla, Washington. And my Peasant Cube started mostly as a COVID project that I would just teach my wife to play Magic with. My Old Border Cube started mostly as I have old border cards that are pretty. Let's put them in a box. This was the only cube I had where I reached what I called a stable list before I had people draft it, and then specifically tried to get a pot of 8 people to draft it. So that's why I had the questions in mental list form going in, is because it was a new thing for me. But the reason I called some of those questions boring is because they're just the questions I ask on any cube night. On any cube night that I'm hosting, regardless of whether it's my cube that is being drafted, I'm paying attention to if people are having fun. I'm paying attention to if people's expectations are being met. I'm paying attention to if whatever is meant to be happening is happening, Like, if someone brings a gimmicky cube, is the gimmick gimmicking? Or do we feel like we're just kind of playing with cards that don't necessarily make sense? So those were not specific to Ball Pit at all.
Well, I think that kind of links in here on an episode of Squares the Cube. You were a guest on that program. And one of the things you said that stuck in my mind was that you're not a curator just of cubes, but of communities. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, very much so. I would almost say that in my cube curation, I am a curator of communities for which the vector of social interaction happens to be a thing that we call cube. And cubes themselves, when I'm designing a list, that doesn't feel like curation to me. That just feels like creative brainstorming. I'm not thinking about it in terms of polishing anything. I'm not thinking about it even necessarily in terms of ever creating the thing itself. Whereas, for example, in Spokane, where I currently reside, there are just a lot of people who are the sort of funny, goofy, empathetic social people that often tend to, in my experience, gravitate towards the funny, goofy social experience that is drafting Magic. And a lot of them, especially if they're queer or people of color or have children or are in any of the demographics that mean they either have a hard time showing up to a game store on a Friday night or don't feel very comfortable showing up to a game store on a Friday night. They pretty much either go to Arena or find some Discord that lets them play on Cockatrice or shift to a different hobby. And someone else in the area had started a group that was doing some pack drafting and some commander. And full honesty, I just straight up co opted it. I joined it like 3 months after it started and was like, hey, everybody, I'm infecting you all with Cube now. And they were like, what's Cube? And I was like, too late, buddy. You all like it already. And then
Guerrilla cube group creation.
exactly. Yeah, just swept the legs of that. And, it evolved into a draft group that has a lot of people that I wouldn't normally see in Spokane at a game store. And Cube is one of the ways that we draft. Probably half the time we draft, it's still just packs. Someone has a box that they're interested in. There's a new set released every 35 minutes now, I think, which means that there's always a new Magic set that someone wants to crack a box of. Not me necessarily, but if that's what people want to draft, then I'm down to draft it. And Cube is just, in my opinion, the best way to facilitate those social interactions. I often end up asking myself the same questions of retail limited that we draft as I ask about Cube, which is why, again, I call them kind of, to me, boring questions. They're just the questions I always ask of when we draft Bloomborough. I'm asking myself the same questions of, is this working? Are people having fun? is the vibe where people expected it to be. And the topic at hand is a magic set, but the concept in my mind is social organization.
In talking with Alex recently, that was one of those ideas of so often Cube is not really about Cube. It's about these experiences that we have outside of it. And it sounds like that's really been a profound vehicle for you to connect to a broad spectrum of people.
Very much so. Whenever someone joins the MTG Cube Talk Discord and I happen to be on and see that in the main channel they have said, "Oh, there are way too many channels here," I always just tell them, "Oh yeah, just mute them all." And
That's right. Pick your favorite three.
what I usually don't tell them is specifically mute all the Magic the Gathering related ones. But that's mostly, honestly, what I've done in the MTG Cube Talk Discord. It's been years since I even looked in, what are they even called? Like cube theory and cube discussion.
Yeah, like cube planning, cube
Yeah, and
theory. Yeah.
I'm out here being like, I don't want to theorize or discuss cube, which isn't true at all. I clearly do want to do both of those things, but I have just no specific interest or need to do that via the Discord. Instead, the main thing I'm interested in is experiencing the other creative pursuits of people who like cube. It's essentially a creative vetting process for me, I guess I would say, in terms of people who I end up interacting with on the server, of someone who not only likes the extreme degree of creativity and time and passion required to make a cube, but also has the social empathy and degree of consciousness in their social interactions that makes them say, "Oh, I'm not only doing this, I'm also doing this largely for other people," is really the exact sort of people that I'm drawn to. Some of my favorite people outside of Cube often end up being musicians, and that's partially because I do a lot of music, but that's partially because the same thing is often true for those people who are really interested in devoting to a craft, spending a lot of time, sometimes just on their own, sometimes literally just staring at a wall with nothing going on outside of their head, getting good at something, but often largely for the benefit of other people. Yes, they get things out of it too, and there are entire swaths of musicians I cannot stand to be in the same room with, because clearly they don't care at all about other people. They care that they're good at a thing. And that can be true for cube curators too. But again, that was painting with broad strokes. In the minutia of the people that I've met through the cube community, it has been a wonderful group of kind, caring, empathetic people.
I love what you're saying about cube and or music as a litmus test for people. Like the people that I most enjoy playing music with are the people that are just fun to be around and that
Mm-hmm.
will tolerate and explore a bunch of new creative ideas. And the same with the people that are pursuing your game projects. You want them to be engaged in that space and not just there to I don't know, inflate their own success
Yeah.
in a way.
I mean, I haven't been in a jazz combo since high school, but the best Magic drafts just feel like a jam session. It's just you're a bunch of people that are arguably all doing your own thing, and there's definitely some competition in there, but it's, when done right, it's the sort of competition that good table banter is, where when someone says something that's funnier than anything else that someone has said, but that's a good thing. The issue isn't that they said something funnier than you. The good thing is that they just said something funnier than you, and you roll with that and you keep building off of each other. And
Yeah, it's material.
yeah, a lot of good creative endeavors to some degree or another build off of improvisation, and how much that happens changes wildly based on the medium. If it's one person on a saxophone with no sheet music in front of a bunch of people, that's one story. Whereas if it's someone who has, I've been getting into digital art on my iPad, and I love that erase button. So not very improvisational in a lot of ways, uh, when you can so easily back out of it. But a lot of the best Magic experiences that I've had feel very improvisational, because either just me as a Magic player, I'm playing a deck, things aren't going the way that I necessarily would have planned, and I'm just figuring out the best way to move forward in that situation, defining best on the scenario. Maybe it's a competition and best is that I win. maybe it's with a group of good people, and the best result is that, someone almost falls out of their chair because the board state is just so laughably bad for somebody or everybody involved.
I think there's so much truth to that too. I mean, part of the draw to a format like draft broadly is that there's so much opportunity to be flexible. You're not just getting out my pre-solved deck and playing it against your pre-solved deck. Like we have to be naturally not locked into any particular thing. You got to go with the flow a little bit.
Entirely. And another reason I connect it to music is there are definitely continuing elements of a draft. The cube will probably still exist. If people drafted packs, they end up taking away some cards, maybe. But generally, they're kind of closed systems. You sit down to a draft, you draft, and then that draft is done. The next draft might be similar. It might be using the same instruments, if we're to continue that analogy, but the play is going to be different. And
Yeah.
I don't usually talk about it with cube designers in musical terms because a lot of them don't necessarily have a ton of musical experience, but that's often what's kicking around in the back of my mind when I talk to cube curators who are struggling with feeling like they need to change up their cube for some reason. Is sometimes that's just because they feel like they've heard enough things played in similar ways that they want to see something else. And it's not that they don't enjoy that. Most people have songs that they could just listen to any number of times, but they also have songs that they're like, I had my 5 per year of that one. That's going in a box until, the decorations for that season come out next year, or until I have gotten it out of my head because it's an earworm. And if I draft it, I will be thinking about that deck for the next 7 work days, and that's untenable at this time of the year, or whatever the rationale is.
Well, I think of that from the performance side as well. Like you think of a touring band where it's like if you have to play the exact same guitar solo on the famous song or whatever, that
Yeah.
can probably wear on you. Versus I think of a band that I enjoy like Snarky Puppy, that they are kind of like they're like a jam band. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, the tune, but the way you're going to approach it is going to be totally different at every concert.
Especially when they're like, "All right, boys, this one's 13 minutes long," and you're like, "What?" And they're like, "What? You don't like that? Okay,
Only
go.
13 minutes.
Yeah,
What are you?
well,
That's
okay,
too short.
there we go. Yeah, yeah. You sit down to draft the ball pit, and you're like, "Okay, you're gonna end up with like 60 card decks, and you can't cut anything." And they're like, "Oh, I did not know I bought a ticket for this band."
Well, and thinking of some of those things together, building experiences that your players can resonate with. Have your players resonated with something like the ball pit? And I should say, not to cut to the end of your article, because people should still read this article, and it's a really fun wrap up.
Oh no, that's totally fine. That's a thing that I released onto the internet, and it no longer exists. The person who wrote that article died. They were a moment in time a few weeks ago. I'm now just a person who's like, wow, there's this doppelganger out there who did something similar to this. Guess that might be a past me. But anyway, to get out of the metaphysical to the slightly less metaphysical, resonate definitely. It's not a unproblematic environment. I have never drafted any environment with this group of people where there haven't been some thoughts expressed afterwards about what could have been different in a good way, or what might have been missing, or what might have been there that shouldn't have been there. That in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think that means that people didn't resonate with it. My draft group really liked Bloomborough. Maybe it's just because a lot of gay people like cute little animals. Maybe it's because it was just actually kind of a fun draft environment. That was a cube that, okay, I called it a cube. It's a cube designed by Wizards of the Coast. I very much harp on that point.
Yeah.
It was a draft environment that a lot of the people in my group resonated with, and we still talked about the things that we didn't like or that didn't work, or how blue-black was kind of a weird color pair there that could have done some other things better. Ball pit, most people really liked. The first draft of it, which is what I wrote the ball pit article about, went just about as well as it could have. We've drafted it. I think we've only done an actual larger draft of it one other time so far. I've been pretty busy. That one, people just went into the draft a little bit more tired. And that's a good thing to be aware of when you are drafting a cube, because it would be tempting to make changes to the ball pit if I'd only heard feedback from that second draft. Because when people are tired, they'll say that there are things that they didn't like or things that they did like that boil more down to just that base instinct of this was a thing that worked for me, this was a thing that didn't work for me. Um,
Especially in a radical recontextualization environment like this.
exactly. So the first time we did it, kind of the opposite of a lot of gimmicky cubes I've heard people express. The first time we did it was very smooth. The second time was a little bit more of a drawn out. People are kind of a little bit just worn down by life in general, and therefore you have to try to pan for gold when you're taking feedback on it. But in terms of resonating very much. The vibes were impeccable, and people really liked just looking at fun, weird cards that they hadn't had good excuse to play with before.
That's certainly a mark of success. Almost any reaction just seeing a card in a pack, I think, is a valuable valuable thing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So many people just like flashed a card to me during the draft, and I was like, haha, illegal. But in the best way possible. I was like, this is what I'm going for, especially for a first draft.
I did have one boring design question, if you'll indulge
Oh,
that.
yeah.
How do you approach selecting those cool cards, like the cards that you're excited about, in an environment like this where literally everything is playable?
The That's a good question that is partially a bad question in that it implies that there is a degree of thought behind it. um, this cube has been rattling around in various forms in my head for a while. So some of those were, I guess, I'll consider legacy spicy cards, meaning cards that I have had in my head for a while. Of I really would just, I really want a cube that can run Titan Forge.
Yeah.
The
Love a good Titan Forge.
I'm not even going to read the words of it.
You don't
It's
have
one
to.
of the
Don't worry about
sickest
it.
looking cards in Magic. You're like, I know everything that's going on in this image. It's a freaking forge. It's making freaking
It makes
titans.
Titans. Yeah.
It looks like I don't
It's
even
right there
like
on the
I
box.
haven't even really consumed much mech animes or things like that, but this is the sort of still image that makes me go, I get why people spend thousands of hours, dwelling over their little models. Um,
This is how Jane gets into a Gunpla.
yeah, here's the start of my Gundam era. Highly doubt that, but so some cards like that are ones that I've always really wanted a cube home for. A few of them are cards that I straight up just found locally and thought I am seeing this physically with my eyes right in front of me, and the goblin part of my brain that knows that I have cards I can trade in for store credit and that I have a box full of metallic balls that need fun objects to cast off of them. This is what this is going into. And the trade would occur that day, or I traded with some people on the Discord as well. And then there were also some cards that are just cards that are beloved to me. So this cube has Galvanoth in it, which is a 5 mana red creature. Galvanoth was one of the cards that inarguably got me to fall in love with Magic because I started playing right around the time it existed. I think there was a starter deck that had it as the foil front face. I am chagrined to say I straight up do not know if the copy in my cube is the copy that was one of my first Magic cards, or if I simply acquired it again over the last few years. I don't care. It's the same card in my head, beautiful as the day I first saw it. It's it's just a fun card that I was like, this isn't a card that you see it in this cube and you immediately know how it's going to be good. But it is a card that you see in this cube and you immediately go, that's a fun little thing. And I had to put in some cards that are just fun little things that, aren't the strongest thing in the world. Too bad, so sad, this isn't the strongest cube in the world either.
So, so if this is any comfort to someone, this is Jane. This is freeing up somebody else to not include Galvanoth in their cube.
Yeah, there we go. Everyone out there who's not running Galvanoth, you're wrong. This should go in your powered vintage cube. You can cast I don't know. What are instants and sorceries people cast in powered vintage cube? You can time
Uh,
walk off the top of your library. Cards gas. 10 out of 10, no
mm.
notes. If I could have a promo of any card, it'd be a Galvanoth with, I don't know, art by somebody who likes drawing things.
We're done. That's it.
Yeah, we're
Shut
done.
everything down.
Boom.
so, so trying to thinking of this project holistically, because there's so much we can explore, of course. Are there things that you've learned working on this project that you would want to share with other folks in their own journey?
Oh, that makes it sound like it's an achievement to have this cube,
Well,
and that there's like a takeaway that I have from it. I'm sure that there are
the answer
things.
may be no.
Yeah,
You know.
I, I'm sure that there are things that I have learned from this cube that I would pass on to other people. The two that immediately pop to mind. First of all, let your projects evolve in your head. Let them evolve on paper. This cube didn't have chromatic spheres when I first thought of it. It was a cube about energy chamber, and it was also a separate cube about Mer Enforcer. And it turned into something that worked better than either of those ideas in a vacuum worked. And I'm a stubborn person creatively sometimes. Probably could have had this cube a while ago, but my brain was like, no, you are going to have a Mer Enforcer cube and you're going to have an energy chamber cube. And those are two good things on their own. And it just took the slow erosion of time for me to get older and wiser and go, okay, let's just do both at once. Let's just make something that actually works. And a big part of that for me was the second thought is just think about your drafters. It's a thing that every cube designer worth their salt talks about, but I don't mean it in any hard scientific way of make sure you know exactly what's going on with your drafters, make sure that it's a cube that works well for XYZ. I really just mean think about the people that play your cube, like the actual people uh, that are real humans that you probably know a little bit about. And in that process, you will have thoughts where you're like, man, that person would like this card. And that doesn't necessarily even mean that you slap it into your cube, but it's a thought that you had that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And once you've had it, you just don't know how many positive effects it could have on your cube because that's the sort of thing that just runs in the back of your mind. And then sometime down the road, maybe it's a year and a half later, you end up putting in something that works for that drafter in a way that you're like, whoa, this wouldn't have ended up here if I had just been thinking mathematically about the process.
That's great. I love both of those ideas. Well, Jane, as we are trending toward wrapping up, and perhaps we've already answered this question, but if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick, and who would you have do the
Yeah.
illustration?
This
I
is,
love this tension right here. This is my
yeah,
favorite.
worst question. My answer is not answering it.
Just the wrong
In the
buzzer
call
sound. Yeah.
right now. This is a hard question for me because one of the things that I like most about Magic is art, and one of the things I like most about cards is when a card has an art that already calls to me. So I very frequently just straight up cut a card from a cube or never even consider including it because its art just isn't good enough. It doesn't do it for me. And that means that there are cards that I know exist out there that the time traveling supercomputer could tell me I want a promo of that I just didn't consider that card ever for any project because its art was so bad that I just didn't care about it as a game piece.
Like you didn't know it would be an
I,
option
I
in
just
this
didn't know it would be
hypothetical.
an option, you know? And that's fun because occasionally I'll see someone say, "Hey, this old card has new art," and I'm like, I knew this card existed at one point, but I forgot about it because it's terrible. And why would I ever want to spend my eye time looking at this? Oh, this new one's kind of okay, cool. But the flip side of that problem for me is that cards like cards like Galvanoth, which are a weird card that doesn't have a promo art for it. I don't want there to be a promo art of Galvanoth because I don't want anyone that runs this card that I encounter this card in their environment to ever run a art other than the one that already exists because first of all, like we said, no one else is running Galvanoth, but second of all, it does what it does well. I don't want a promo copy of it. I will answer given the spirit of this that I would we've decided you can have a person who no longer exists on this mortal coil be your artist, right?
Sure.
I would choose Chromatic Sphere and I would have art just because I want to see what he would do with it. I would have art by John Singer Sargent, who is famous for portraiture.
Oh, interesting.
late 1800s, early 1900s. He did one painting late in his life, which he's one of those artists where I think of him in his late 1800s, his very, what at the time they would have called Oriental inspired design motifs. Late in his life, he happened to still be alive during, the roaring 20s and did some art where you're like, this is straight up Art Deco. I would never have expected that you would have grown as an artist past the sort of beautiful oil portraiture you did to very geometric images that could totally have been in the lobby of, any mega corporation at the time's corporate office. But in the way that, looking back on certain 1920s art, I'm just like, and that's a good thing. It's not that the art is corporate, it's that it's just very powerfully geometric. And I would want him either early in his life or late in his life to come up with a version of Chromatic Sphere, because the first printing of Chromatic Sphere, the first one is two dudes tripping over each other, and there's like a little thing on the ground.
Oh, right. Oh,
Yeah,
right, right,
it's
right.
like we
Yeah,
lost the dog
invasion,
toy,
I think.
and we need to grab it before something bad happens. Like that is an art that very much is not about the sphere; it's about the story. And John Singer Sargent drew a lot of pictures that were just women existing, and I would love a version of Chromatic Sphere that's just someone just messing around with a little marble sphere or something like that, the way that a lot of curious people or perhaps ADHD people like me would sit around just, holding the little geometric thing they found on someone else's desk and just spinning it around in their hand. Conversely, late in his life, he has a portrait that I think it's called like Atlas in the Garden of the Hesperides or something like that. I don't even know if that's how that word is pronounced because I've never known what order the letters go in. But it's just a painting of Atlas holding up the world surrounded by the denizens of the garden. And, that's a sphere. He's drawn some round things in his life. I would love to see, knowing that this physically could never happen, I would love to see what he would do with it. And then if I designed the promo via him, I could get 480 copies of it, and I could
Yes.
immediately backsleeve this cube with them.
They would be artist proofs, and you could just have somebody else illustrate
Oh,
all the cards you want on the other
even
side.
better. And that would be perfect because then I could have other people write things on the back of it on that pristine white expanse.
Now we're cooking.
There we go. Okay, I gotta go grave digging. I'll be back.
Well, Jane, this has been a delight, and I'm so glad that you've taken the time to walk us through this. I should note that if folks want to hear more of your scalding takes on all things magic, you participate from time to time in a little group called the Pack One Slick Ones, available on Usman's Substack.
Yes, that group of fellow Pack One Slick Ones, yes.
Where else should people be going to find your projects, or maybe to follow up on the ball pit, or anything else that you do?
Even on the Pack One Slick Ones, I just tell people don't find me. If you stumble upon me in any space, like talk to me. Cool, that's awesome. I technically have like a Blue Sky now, which I don't even really use. I'm using it to advertise a cube event in the Inland Northwest, which I guess I should plug here. This July 19th and 20th in Spokane, Washington, there's the Inland Northwest Cube Fest. So if you wish to interact with me, buy a plane ticket. On MTG Cube Talk, that's the Discord server that I know Kate through and that I, interact with the most, mostly non-magic related content, but I'm always willing to answer questions there. I just go by Jane there now. Used to go by Maramis or variations thereof, but if you ping someone named Jane or see someone with a weird profile picture right now, it's just the hovering eye of Moby Dick. It's a place you can find me.
Well, truly, this is a joy for me. I so appreciate your spirit on the craft, and I'm grateful that you've taken the time here. So, Jane, thank you so much for doing this with me.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for asking me.
Reasonably. Oh, hey, there you are, printer. Awesome, fantastic timing. Sorry, just a second.
Do we have our notes now?
Yeah, the printer waited like 20 minutes to print that. That's amazing. Hey, I have
This
notes.
better stay in the podcast. This is the all natural. We're okay. It's a creative project. We're painting plain air here. You never know when a bird's gonna on the canvas, and sometimes I'm not supposed to cuss on this one. Okay, maybe we take it from the
Oh,
top.
no,
No,
no, that's
um,
fantastic, that's fantastic.
yeah,
I
you never know when something's gonna go wrong when you're doing something creatively, and that's just the way we go about it.